Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1963. We're going to be taking a look at Bob Dylan and he's going to be playing through Blowing in the Wind. So let's get Bob up on screen and see how he gets on.
How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? Yes, and how many seas must the white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? Yes, and how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is a blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many years must a mountain exist before it is washed to the sea? Yes, and how many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? Yes, and how many times must a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is a blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many times must a man look up before he can really see the sky? Yes, and how many years must one man have before he can hear a people cry? Yes, and how many deaths will it take till he knows too many people have died? The answer, my friend, is a blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
And there we have it. Well, with Bob Dylan, where do we start? Just starting with a few performance things to point out. There is a banjo and bass mixed in underneath what Bob is playing on the guitar. And at the beginning of the track and midway through the track, they do race ahead a little bit from what Bob's playing on his guitar. And I think it might have been the case that they were off stage and just trying to hear Bob strumming the guitar, it's really difficult to stay in time. So fortunately, it all synced up towards the end. They definitely got it back. And just about this song in general, because in 1994 it got inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. In 2004 it was ranked at number 14 in Rolling Stone magazine's 500 greatest songs of all time. And you might have heard another version of this as well. There was another version that was released, and that was by Peter, Paul and Mary. And the interesting thing about that is that Albert Grossman at the time was the manager of Peter, Paul and Mary, but also of Bob Dylan. So when Bob released this on his album, just 3 weeks later, he got Peter, Paul and Mary into the studio and just did one take, recorded it and released it, and they got to number 2 in the charts, and it outsold Bob Dylan's version of it. And it comes from the album The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, released in 1963, and it's been covered hundreds of times by so many different artists. Marianne Faithfull did a version in 1965 as well. So straight off the bat, being released in 1963 and instantly being covered by Peter, Paul and Mary, it was one of those tracks that so many other artists wanted to cover. And when we're looking at an artist like Bob Dylan, the analysis could go on probably all year, not just all night. But looking at this performance and the way that Bob delivers his vocal, it's one of those things that was so unique because timing-wise, he just threw the vocal in there without any reference to the guitar, but then sometimes he would reference the guitar in terms of the timing. So it was very much a delivery that would keep your attention because it wasn't uniform, and more often than not it would just be Bob, a guitar, a harmonica and his voice. Here we have got the introduction of banjo and bass as well, but having that bounce from the root note of the chord to the rest of the chord is like a call and response, and it gets that rhythm just to move along, shift along. It's almost plodding, especially when we add in that bass. So it is very uniform, it's very strict, but then we've got that contradiction of the freeform vocal that Bob throws in, and it's a common theme throughout his compositions and his vocal delivery, in order to be so freeform vocally but so strict musically. So you get that contrast all the time between the music and the message of the song, the delivery of the vocal. Another thing that Bob does, like he does in this performance, is introduce that other lead voice within the composition. So he's going from his lead vocal to the lead voice of the harmonica, which just gives you a little bit of light and shade, and it just shifts your focus away from a vocal to an instrument, so that it's going to make it more interesting, but it's just going to take the emphasis off the vocal, so then by the time you come back to the vocal, you're going to be focusing on that vocal even more because it is fresh. You've had a little break from it. So musically, it's such a great thing to do to keep everybody interested in the track, but also to help the lyrics hit home, because you're now ready for that next verse once you have that little break, the musical break with the harmonica. The thing about Bob for me is that he's the embodiment of a perfect musical artist in terms of putting across their point of view, getting across a message with their songs, and having the perfect level of musical ability at their instrument in order to do that. And let me try and explain what I'm talking about, because a lot of people watch other artists and especially other instrumentalists, if they do play the same instrument, and they think, oh, I wish I was as good as that other player. But you have to question, why do you wish you were as good as another artist? And for me, Bob Dylan is a great example of someone who, in this performance, is just hitting a G chord and he's hitting a D chord, and he's not doing anything that is massively technically advanced on his instrument, but he's doing exactly what he needs to get his point across as an artist through the song, through the lyrics. So for somebody that's sold over 100 million albums, one of the biggest selling artists of all time, he shows you exactly how to do it and what you should be focusing on. If you're focusing on trying to increase your technical ability and instrument to support your artistic vision, then it's fine. But if you can get across your message with your current ability at your instrument, then that's all that is required. This also brings me onto the point of vocals, because when we put Bob's vocals under the spotlight, he's not arpeggiating chords with his vocals. He's not singing complex technical trills here. He's just got a solid vocal, and especially with his performance, melodically he's hitting the notes, but he's not applying excessive vibrato. He's not getting into a lot of techniques. And some of the best singers and singer-songwriters don't have all of those trills going on in their voice. And when we take this under the spotlight, it's almost a contradiction musically. The major chords that are always going to make the backing sound happy and upbeat, and then pairing that with the lyrical content that is serious and making a serious point, it's going to register in your brain differently because you've got a contradiction there. And this is something that you might not consciously pick up on musically, or even when you're just listening to it, but it will register. You'll start to listen into the song and you'll be more deeply affected by it because you've got two things going in opposite directions. And Bob, as an author, a poet, a visual artist, and just an overall artist in so many different ways, he's the kind of guy that would always ask you a question, and certainly with this song we get that. And the interesting thing about this song in particular is the tagline of the song is, "The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind." But what does that mean? Because it can either mean that the answer's so obvious it's blowing in your face, or it can mean that the answer can't be deciphered because it's blowing in the wind, it's moving around, you don't know what the answer is. So getting into the profound impact that Bob had, not only on the music industry, but socially in the mid-60s, we're talking about 1964, the times they are a-changing, because that was one of those albums that was taken on by civil rights movements and also anti-war movements. His music was embedded in such serious topics, and the great thing about music is that unlike people who might be in parliament or world leaders, they get up onto a stage and they're given a microphone and they can talk, but the general public don't get their say. They don't get a microphone. Whereas guys like Bob Dylan could get up on stage and make a political point, and for 3 or 4 minutes, nobody is going to stop them because it's art, because it's music, and it's free speech. And artists like Bob Dylan, he was the main example of a guy that could go up there, write a song, and connect with so many people with their point of view, because he was the voice for the masses. Another thing to consider is the time that Bob is making these songs and releasing them, early 60s, mid 60s, where back in those days, having an opinion and voicing that opinion was sometimes a dangerous thing. Nowadays, we've got so much free speech. You can go on the internet and upload a video about your particular view on a topic, and there's nothing to stop you doing that. Whereas back in the 60s, it was a lot more restrictive. I could imagine that at the time, people would have been watching him on stage and they'd have said, well, hang on, you can't say that. Because of the times. That was just the nature of the times. Having that kind of free speech wasn't a normal thing to see. The great thing about it is that he had a microphone and he was going to use it, and he was going to use his music to make a point. And that was what a lot of people connected to. And more often than not, it was the point that all those people watching wanted to make themselves. So Bob managed to take that traditional folk sound, underpin it with the serious lyrics and message within the songs, but drag it into the mainstream. And certainly with his first album in 1962, just called Bob Dylan, those were all traditional folk songs with a couple of originals on there. But then when he released his next album in 1963, and that was The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, that had 11 original tracks on it. So people now started to get an introduction to Bob Dylan, the songwriter. This is the thing about top artists and top writers, is they see things that relate to the human mind, not just a social situation that happened to be prevalent in the early 60s. It was a social situation that will repeat itself ad infinitum because it is a human behavior. And Blowing in the Wind, for example, is a song that you can relate to something in 2019 just as you could in the early 1960s. Bob also released another side of Bob Dylan in 1964, the same year that he released The Times They Are A-Changin'. And in 1966, he had a motorcycle accident, but nobody knows how serious it was because he didn't go to hospital, but he has said himself that he just broke a couple of vertebrae, so it sounds pretty serious to me. And during that time, he recorded a lot of songs with the band, and those were released in 1975 as a collaborative album called The Basement Tapes. As I'm sure you can understand that when covering an artist like Bob Dylan, due to the sheer body of work that he has, it's going to be impossible to cover it all in one analysis video. But just to summarize things, from the late 60s into the early 70s, he did a little bit of country music, explored that genre, and in 1975 is when he released Blood on the Tracks, and that was really well received. It was a critical success as well as a commercial success. It went 2 times platinum in the USA, and it went platinum pretty much everywhere else. In the late 1970s, Bob became a born-again Christian, and he got into contemporary gospel music, before then in the early 80s returning to his more traditional rock music sound. And just to point out a few of his major works later on in his career, in 1997, Time Out of Mind was released. He also released Love and Theft in 2001 and Modern Times in 2006, and then Tempest was in 2012. And more recently, he spent a lot of time covering traditional American standards, and in particular Frank Sinatra songs. So he's gone in that direction, but also he's on tour all the time, and this is called the Never Ending Tour, which started in 1980. So Bob is still out there, still touring on that particular tour. But like I said, it's impossible to cover everything that Bob has achieved in his career, and he's published 8 books of drawings and paintings. He's had his work exhibited in major art galleries, and he's sold over 100 million records that I mentioned earlier. He's probably one of the most, if not the most, covered singer-songwriters there has ever been in terms of his body of work and the songs that he's written. He also picked up a Nobel Prize in Literature in 2016. And in 2008, the Pulitzer Prize jury awarded Bob a special citation for his impact on popular music and American culture. So Bob Dylan is one of those artists, singer-songwriters, that went deeper than the music to make a point politically and about society and the people running society. And that's what the best artists do. No matter which medium they've chosen to get their message across, they will ask questions and make you question the people that are running society. And Bob certainly did that with his music, but he did that in so many other mediums as well. Like I mentioned, the poetry and everything else, the paintings. He just has that universal appreciation for art, but he can make a real point with it as well. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!